Tonight's headlines: urban warfare. U.S. Marines hunt down enemy building by building. A senior U.S. commander warns of heavy U.S. casualties ahead. The battle for Basra, still tougher than expected, with civilians dying. Also tonight, Eye on America, a hero Marine's final letter home to his young son. A mysterious disease spreads, and so does fear. The race to find the cause. And as a new season begins, thoughts turn to fans a long way from home.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather reporting from CBS News headquarters in New York.
Good evening. Lead elements of U.S. ground forces moving around south of Baghdad are now less than 50 miles from the Iraqi capital. How soon they will actually close to at least Baghdad's outskirts is an open question. Here are some of the latest developments. More bombs and missiles did what is called heavy damage to government buildings in central Baghdad, including Saddam Hussein's information ministry, hit again. U.S. and British high-altitude bombers and close-in attack jets pounded Republican Guard armor and troops defending the southern approaches to Baghdad. British troops advanced slowly against stiff Iraqi resistance in Basra, and British officials said 8,000 Iraqi soldiers have been captured or surrendered since fighting began. CBS News correspondents are deployed with U.S. and allied forces on the front lines in Iraq and at other key locations around the world to bring you clear coverage of the war. Urban warfare well south of Baghdad is increasing some, so we begin with CBS's Mark Strassman. He's in the city of Najaf, about 90 miles south of the Iraqi capital, where a sharp engagement today highlighted new tactics the U.S. is using, trying to wipe out the harassment attacks that have slowed the march to Baghdad.
Thunder roared into Najaf at daybreak. Then came lightning. Charlie Company poured into this military compound, searching building by building for Iraqi fighters dug in here.
Priority right now?
Security. Security and clearing buildings, sir.
Biggest risk?
RPGs.
RPGs being?
Rocket-propelled grenades, sir.
There are dozens of buildings to clear in this compound. Right now, in the one behind that wall, Charlie Company thinks there's an Iraqi soldier firing a grenade launcher.
U.S. commanders wanted to avoid fighting inside cities like Najaf. The fear was killing civilians and destroying areas of religious significance to Muslims. But resistance has been tougher than expected, so the fight shifted into urban neighborhoods. Here, at least, without a single U.S. casualty, at least 40 Iraqis were killed in the fight's first 6 hours, many of them members of the Fedayeen, Saddam Hussein's paramilitary diehards. They're well armed. Troops blew into this armory. Its gun racks could equip an Iraqi brigade.
There's hundreds of rifles in here, and this room is very similar to all the other rooms around this little compound, so.
Good day.
Yeah, very good day.
The Fedayeen's other weapon is ruthlessness, threatening Iraqis who surrender, threatening their families. Many do anyway, more each day, some of them terrified farmers and merchants. U.S. soldiers stopped this man at a checkpoint. In his pocket was his Ba'ath Party ID and a startling wad of Iraqi dinars.
By the looks of him, he's been eating well, living good. So,
What's all that tell you? The eating well and all the cash?
that he is one of Saddam's party members that's been sent in to reinforce the population.
Most people in Najaf want no part of any of this. They've been shocked and awed by threats for so long. Now they're scared of uncertainty. Mark Strassman, CBS News, Najaf, Iraq.
Iraqi fears will not be eased by word of a tragic incident today near Najaf. U.S. Central Command says a van approached a U.S. Army checkpoint and failed to stop even when warning shots were fired. Fearing another car bomb attack, the American troops opened fire on the vehicle, killing 7 Iraqi civilians, all women and children. Night 13 of the war. For an overview of how it is and is not going, we turn again to CBS's David Martin at the Pentagon with the big picture. David?
Dan, in the grimmest forecast yet, one of the senior commanders of the war told reporters today the U.S. is, quote, prepared to pay a very high price. If that means a lot of casualties, there will be a lot of casualties.
Sinister black-clad fighters patrolling the streets of Baghdad lie in wait for American forces. The kind of fighters who have ensnarled British troops in vicious urban combat in southern Iraq. Further north near Baghdad, U.S. ground troops had their first taste of battle today with the Republican Guards.
There are maneuvers going to try to destroy those divisions that stand in our way.
Over the weekend, American aircraft dropped 3,000 more precision-guided weapons, concentrating on the Republican Guard divisions closest to Baghdad, hitting everything from fuel trucks to artillery which could fire chemical weapons.
We are seeing significant degradation of those forces. I won't put an exact number on it, but I'll say very significant weakening of the forces.
Aircraft and cruise missiles continue to strike Baghdad, even knocking out the lights in part of the city. But the Iraqi regime is still able to move Republican Guard units from as far north as Kirkuk to reinforce the divisions south of the capital. They can afford to strip away some of their defenses in the north because the U.S. has only lightly armed paratroopers and special operations forces in northern Iraq. But it's only a minor break for the Iraqis, because as they move south, they expose themselves to air attack. The biggest battlefield problem remains the fighting in the rear, which is tying up elite maneuver units like the 82nd Airborne that could be used for the assault on Baghdad. Today, the U.S. began airlifting part of an armored cavalry regiment from Louisiana to beef up rear area security.
As the Iraqis scramble to reinforce Baghdad, U.S. intelligence sometimes loses track of individual units. And Pentagon officials say they want to be sure they know where all the Republican Guards are before they attack. Dan?
David Martin reporting live from the Defense Department. As David reported, the British have run into what's called unexpectedly tough resistance from Iraqi forces in Basra. Another British soldier was killed there today. The city's mostly Shiite Muslim residents were expected to welcome Allied troops as liberators, but it didn't happen, and for whatever reason, it still hasn't, as CBS's Mark Phillips reports.
The operation the British call James after Bond is exercising its license to kill. Call it tightening the noose, call it flushing out the enemy, they've been pouring fire into the resistance hard spots that still abound in and around Basra, the city that was supposed to fall quickly but hasn't. When a particularly stubborn point is encountered, heavier fire is called in. Morning reveals the cost to Saddam's loyalists of their continued defiance. But there's another price being paid here as well, by the people. The longer the battle goes on, the more destruction it brings, the more civilian deaths it causes, the angrier the local population, in whose name this war is being fought, gets, despite the bringing in of water and other relief supplies. There was nothing military here, this man says. Why was it attacked? The official line, though, is there's another reason the local population has shown such reluctance to be liberated.
That the Iraqi people are still, in some cases, under the boot of the regime. And where that boot is applied, there's a great want, a great desire to have the boot removed.
Perhaps, but the sequence of the liberation of Iraq's people has now been reversed. Initially, the hope was that popular uprisings would follow in the wake of the coalition advance and hasten the collapse of the regime. Now it seems it'll take the collapse of the regime to give the people enough confidence to rebel. Mark Phillips, CBS News, Kuwait.
Two-time Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times correspondent John Burns is one of the few independent Western journalists still in Baghdad. He reported to us today that loosening the Iraqi regime's hold on the country is proving now unquestionably to be a tougher job than most outsiders expected.
We knew that the agencies that we cannot see, the secret police and intelligence agencies, were the ones that really controlled this country. I think what we've seen as the government has been progressively degraded by American bombing is that those agencies, those mainly invisible agencies, have been designed to operate in almost any crisis. Somehow or other they manage to continue communicating with each other. Their grip is undiminished. The concern among ordinary Iraqis of being seen or suspected of any kind of disloyalty is higher than I have ever seen it.
In Baghdad, John Burns of the New York Times. The International Red Cross says it's begun visiting Iraqi prisoners of war held by U.S.-led forces near Qasr. The Red Cross says there is no word on when it will get access to American prisoners held by Iraq. Newsday believes Iraq may be holding two of its journalists. Reporter Matthew McAllister and photographer Moises Saman disappeared 1 week ago while on assignment for Newsday newspaper in Baghdad. Their families now have asked the Reverend Jesse Jackson for his help in tracking them down. Here's the latest official U.S. casualty count in the war with Iraq. 47 Americans are confirmed dead, 7 are prisoners of war, 18 are missing in action. CBS's Byron Pitts with the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force reports on some of the most recent casualties.
When this Marine helicopter squadron first arrived in the region from Camp Pendleton, California, their commanding officer told them, "Some of us may die, but we'll all go home." Late Sunday, his reminder became real.
For the commanding officer of HMLA 169, the loss of 3 Marines was like the loss of 3 sons.
We said before we came over that if something like this happened, we were all committed and that we would go on with the mission. But we go on with heavy heart.
And Sunday night, the day's mission was nearly complete. The Huey had stopped for refueling. In the dark and the dust, the helicopter's giant propeller blade stirred up the sand, causing what's called brownout, temporarily blinding the pilot and crew. The Huey lurched forward and crashed. For weeks, their commanding officer warned his pilots, brownouts pose nearly as great a threat as the Iraqi army.
It doesn't matter what mental preparation you make. When something like this happens, it just becomes absolutely personal.
One crewman was single, another recently married. The captain leaves behind a wife and 3 children.
Their squadron will hold a memorial service on Tuesday. The work will stop. Marines will pray.
But then, as always, they will return to work as they mourn the loss not just of Marines, but men they loved like brothers. Byron Pitts, CBS News, with the U.S. Marines in Iraq.
There's more news ahead on the CBS Evening News, including new outbreaks of the mystery virus that has killed dozens of people. Health officials expand quarantines and travel advisories. Unions representing American Airlines pilots, flight attendants, and mechanics reportedly reached tentative agreement today on givebacks to keep the airline out of bankruptcy. War worries sent stocks generally lower. The Dow lost 153 points, the NASDAQ 28. The Dow and the NASDAQ finished the first quarter of the year in negative territory. There is growing concern over the mystery virus that causes severe acute respiratory syndrome called SARS. While most people recover, the illness has caused about 60 deaths, and the disease is still spreading. The latest cases are popping up in North America and in Asia, where SARS was first identified. CBS's Elizabeth Caledon is on the Health Watch.
The mysterious SARS illness is showing no signs of being contained tonight. Officials in Hong Kong announced 92 new cases in this single apartment complex, quarantining all residents for 10 days. The CDC is now advising Americans to postpone any non-essential travel to mainland China, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Hanoi. Canada is the other trouble spot. A 4th death and an infected child have led health officials in Toronto to restrict visitors to all hospitals in the province.
What happened in Canada was that the early cases arrived before this disease was recognized, and so there was an opportunity for the chain of transmission to get established there. So in a sense, the cat is out of the bag in Canada.
American health officials see no need to curtail travel to and from Canada, saying the American and Canadian SARS outbreaks are very different. Still, there's plenty of anxiety about the spread of this potentially fatal pneumonia-like illness. Experts warn it is easily transmitted through coughing or sneezing, leading to concern about the safety of public spaces.
This virus is spreading very much like the common cold virus, and that's worrisome because it is efficiently spread, at least in people who have close face-to-face contact.
Even die-hard Toronto Blue Jays fans were reluctant to attend tonight's home opener against the New York Yankees, fearing the Sky Dome would be like one big petri dish. In the lab, progress is being made in identifying the cause of SARS. Some say we could know in days. Scientists are also close to developing a diagnostic test. Breakthroughs can't come rapidly enough to stop this rapid-fire health threat. Elizabeth Caledon, CBS News, New York.
We have an update now on 5-month-old Dylan Sellers and his family. You may remember Dylan's father went to the Gulf with his U.S. Marine unit not knowing if his infant son would get a life-saving heart transplant. Dylan did get a new heart 2 weeks ago at California's Loma Linda Hospital. And as you can see, he's growing bigger and stronger by the day. Up next here on the CBS Evening News, Eye on America, war's toll on a second generation of one American family. NBC News today reversed its previous position and fired Baghdad correspondent Peter Arnett for giving an interview to state-run Iraqi television and apparently for what he said in the interview. Preceded by Iraqi martial music, in the interview, Arnett said the original U.S. warplane had failed and that it, quote, misjudged the determination of the Iraqi forces. Arnett also said in our quote, our reports about civilian casualties here about the resistance of the Iraqi forces are going back to the United States, and it helps those who oppose the war when you challenge the policy to develop their arguments. NBC News, as recently as yesterday, defended Arnett, but after negative public reaction today said it was wrong for him to do the interview. Casualties of war. The official tolls can only tell us how many have fallen in combat, but tell us nothing of the widows, parents, and children, the families who must go on without them. CBS's Mika Brzezinski tonight tells the story of one such family in Eye on America.
I met him while he was at Camp Pendleton.
6 weeks later, Phil and Amanda Jordan were married. It was the simplest decision of their lives.
He's just very giving to everybody and so non-judgmental.
He smiled.
But the decision to have a child was far more difficult. A Marine who saw combat in the first Gulf War, Phil Jordan didn't want his family history to repeat itself.
Because he lost his own father when he was young, and he didn't want the same thing to happen.
But last week, Phil and 8 other Marines were killed by Iraqi soldiers pretending to surrender. Tyler, now 6 years old, still expects his father to walk through the door in uniform. What was Philip in Tyler's eyes?
Definitely a Marine. He imitates him all the time. This was the last letter that I have.
In a letter that came days after his death, Tyler's Marine father spoke to his son man to man.
Everything is, hey, buddy. It says, I miss you very much. I miss you badly. I love you, buddy. We'll write tomorrow.
A good father?
The best.
Happy birthday. When he left his wife and son, Phil believed the sacrifice would be worthwhile if this time the U.S. removed Saddam Hussein. What is your message to President Bush?
To finish it. They're not dying in vain if they finish the job.
Knowing that her son will soon ask why, this widow is waiting to see if she'll have an honorable answer.
Don't make my son grow up without a father for nothing. Don't take my husband away for nothing.
In Enfield, Connecticut, I'm Mika Brzezinski for Eye on America.
It is no ordinary time for America. It is, in fact, an unusual and dangerous time with the country at war. Yet an American rite of spring and a big business went off right on schedule with the cry, play ball. In some places it didn't seem much like spring. It snowed at Camden Yards in Baltimore, on the field as off. Thoughts were with the troops overseas. So we asked Sports Illustrated columnist Rick Riley for his thoughts.
Maybe baseball doesn't mean a used wad of chew to you right now. Not now. Not as bombs are dropping and orphans are being minted and body bags are piling up in Iraq. But to the soldiers I know over there, baseball means a little more than it ever has. To them, baseball is that sweet whiff of home in the middle of the smoke and the death. It's part of what they're fighting to come back to. You know, the cheeseburger dripping on the t-shirt and the wax job on the Corvette, and yeah, a hot dog in a baseball game. We all gripe about baseball and its zillions of flaws, but imagine what a soldier would give right now to spit the sand out of his mouth, toss the freeze-dried yak off his lap, and trade places with the guy who's trying to snag a foul ball without spilling a drop of his ice-cold beer. It'll be different this year. We won't talk about a Barry Bonds bomb, or Mike Piazza gunning anybody down, or Roger Clemens dodging a bullet. But we will carry on with the 104th straight year of the most American of games, baseball. And maybe this season will mean just a little more. Maybe the daily box score and the headfirst slide into the plate, beamed halfway around the world, will be our little gift. And we'll ache to hear once again the phrase that we most want to hear, safe at home.
Will we ever? Rick Riley of Sports Illustrated. Dan Rather reporting for the CBS Evening News. Good night.
This is CBS.